I'm Carol Looper. I'm a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and I'm very happy to see you all here on this Columbus Weather Day. Today's forum, Franklinton, from Bottoms to Boom Town, is presented with support from the Robert Weiler Company and Casto, each one represented here by many guests today and many associates. Please help me thank them. Now, across the river and just west of downtown Columbus, an area that used to be called the Bottoms is experiencing a boom of people, investment, and construction. Central Ohio's strong economy is rising many neighborhoods and suburbs, but nowhere is the change more profound or happening more quickly than Franklinton. Now, what does this mean for the people who live there, the people who work there, or for those who aren't entirely comfortable with all the attention? Please welcome our speakers, former head of the Franklinton Development Association, now principal of Sweeney Associates, Jim Sweeney, President of Mount Carmel West and Grove City, Sean McKibben, founder and managing partner of Hatch Partners, LLC, Christopher Celeste, and our host, CEO of Scene Digital Media, publisher of 1812 Columbus, Brian Zuercher. Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Carol. So the story of Franklinton, I think the title says it all. It's Bottoms to Boom Town, which is this story of change, and in the middle of change, and a change that is affecting a lot of individuals, and the visualization of it's huge. We can look out here and see a town that many years would not recognize 20 years ago. I was trying to think about like a novel way that I could introduce this sort of change topic myself, but the reality is I'm not from Franklinton. I didn't grow up in Franklinton. I'm a Columbus now resident downtown, but a bystander. But I did reflect on a moment when I was a kid, and the area behind our house was mostly a forest. It probably was really small, but I thought it was huge. And we would build forts and hang out with our friends. And then one day, the construction came in, and a new house is being built. And I remember thinking, wait a second, like that's not allowed to happen. That's my area, right? That's my place where I'm learning and hanging out with my friends. Felt completely helpless, which I totally was at like 6 or 7 years old, completely incapable of stopping the construction. And look, as it turns out, the house that was built there had 3 kids who became great friends of mine. But a lot of people feel helpless when this change is happening. There's so many dynamics that most of us either understand or don't understand. And so hopefully today what we'll bring out to you is some of the stories, some of the experiences that the people of Franklinton and the organizations involved and the many stakeholders can share with you. So, Jim, you are Mr. Franklinton. So let's provide a little bit of history. I found a fun fact for myself that Mr. Sullivan named Franklinton as paying homage to Ben Franklin. So I don't want you to give a history of Franklinton all the way back that far, but if you could maybe take a minute or two and tell us a little bit about your perspective on the last 20 years of Franklinton, what that has looked like then and what you see as it's happening now.
Sure, thank you. I was hired by the Franklinton Development Association, which is a community development corporation, now called Fuel. I forget what the Fuel stands for at the moment. It's a community development corporation made up of people who live in the neighborhood or have some stake in the neighborhood. So neighborhood stakeholders like Mount Carmel and others like Bruce Warner here in the audience brought me on to direct the organization and try to grow it in 2002. That date is important because the flood wall, the Franklinton flood wall, was completed in 2003, and the expectation was that there would be a boom at that time. There was a lot of, the flood wall was sort of announced at a period in Columbus history when a lot of neighborhoods were really coming on. You could say gentrifying, I don't want to get into that exactly, but, Short North was just becoming a thing. German Village had happened, Italian Village was starting, and a lot of people thought Franklinton, as soon as that flood wall got done, would be boom. What they didn't really count on was how long the sort of divestment had had sunk into the neighborhood, and so the values were pushed so super low over so much time during the floodplain era that nobody really wanted to take a chance at that time. And so, you know, our mission was to do two things, basically. Create better housing options for people who live in Franklinton. At the time, this is before 2008, so the entire emphasis was on ownership, so there's very little emphasis on doing any rental property. But the other was to try to build a community that had a more diverse population. And diverse, especially in this case, means economically. We wanted to have a mixed income community when we didn't. We had almost everybody in Franklinton was poor. And so we really did set out back in 2002 to build a neighborhood that would be attractive to other people of higher income to come and participate. And so we did that and built some houses along the way, a lot of houses. 2008 hit and everything stopped. And things are just getting, you know, back into modern history right now.
I think it'd be important too, is I was surprised at this. I hadn't thought about this. I think a lot of us maybe in this room have gone to land grant, have gone to Strongwater, been part of the more like kind of modern new things there. But can you explain to people sort of what the breadth, how far Franklinton goes west and east, and sort of the whole geography of what Franklinton is encompassing?
Sure, I could do that fast. Franklinton, one of the great things about this neighborhood is it's very clearly defined. The river on the north side, the north and the east side, to the east of downtown, and then I-70 on the south and the west side. So it's a very clearly defined neighborhood.
Yeah, I think some people realize it doesn't go all the way, like it goes past the highway on the west side. Is that true? Is that end right there?
Well, historically, Bruce, Franklinton got outside those boundaries a little bit south of 70 down Harmon Avenue, and technically still is.
Okay.
And that's one of the confusing things about this kind of work, really, is people have their own sort of idea what the boundaries of different things are, what's in the neighborhood, what's not. Yeah. Is the homeless shelter in Franklinton? Absolutely. But it's on the other side of 70. It's on Mound Street. So most people's cognitive map of Franklinton follows the freeway and the river.
Chris, it's been some years now, the Idea Foundry, which you've been a founding partner of building up. Explain to me kind of like what you saw as the opportunity, both there was probably a real estate opportunity, but also a community that surrounded that would help, and probably defining what the Idea Foundry is helpful for people.
Sure. I probably represent the newcomers. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in a conversation about Franklinton. Clearly, Mount Carmel has been there for decades. My wife, Nancy Kramer, was born at Mount Carmel in Franklinton. And as Jim just said, he's been there for 15 years. I'm 4 years into my Franklinton experience. And the one thing that's clear to me, and one of the reasons we, Nancy and I, and the work we're doing there were attracted to Franklinton, is because Franklinton isn't someplace new. It goes back 225 years, as you hinted at. And even this title is a little misleading because before Franklinton was the Bottoms, it was the Boom Town. And so part of the way I look at Franklinton is it's not a question of whether there's going to be change in Franklinton. Change is inevitable. The real question before us is, will it be thoughtful? Will it be humane? Will it be productive? Will it engage the people who currently call it home? So with that in mind, when we were looking at where do we want to have an impact on the future of Columbus, our view was Franklinton is the perfect place. It's an intersection of open space with opportunities and existing space with challenges. And frankly, lots of bright spots, even among those seeming challenges. And so we were drawn to that, and somebody introduced me to Jim. I joined the advisory board at FDA. Through that, I became aware of what was happening at the warehouse nearby, where the Idea Foundry had been invited to come in and work. I'm actually not a founding member of the Idea Foundry. The Idea Foundry was founded 10 years ago this August by Alex Bandar and built by he and a team and hundreds of members who built it over time. What we did is we saw an empty warehouse that they had crawled inside of at the behest of FDA. And we saw an opportunity to put money into that building and by revitalizing the building, create a bigger space that could have a bigger programmatic impact. So our investment in the Idea Foundry was done so that we could unlock the value of the building and have an impact on the neighborhood. And one important thing about that is we spent upwards of $1 million around that building, but it was never an issue because that money went directly to FDA and the FDA put that money right back into the neighborhood. So one of the really interesting opportunities was it was this chance to be a social entrepreneur and make an investment in the neighborhood that you knew stayed in the neighborhood. Now, the Idea Foundry is designed to try to invite people into it with an open public lobby, with now a coffee shop, things we're trying to do to activate that particular part of the neighborhood. But it's on the eastern edge of a neighborhood that you said is quite big, and we recognize we have a responsibility, maybe even sort of, I'd think about it almost like a penance as a developer, to come into the neighborhood and say it's not enough to stay in our footprint. We have to think about the entire neighborhood we inhabit. So that's how we came into Franklinton 3 years ago. That's certainly the mindset we're trying to bring to some of the projects we're engaged in.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Sean, big visual presence, Mount Carmel's there, changing presence there. Talk about sort of the history that Mount Carmel has and what it's thinking about the future.
Sure. So we've been privileged and proud to serve the Franklinton community for over 130 years. This was the initial establishment of the mission and ministry of the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So there's a lot of great things going on throughout our health system history. Obviously, we've expanded a lot. When we look at the Franklinton opportunity, we're investing $46 million in what we feel is a different future of healthcare. The major components of the campus will be expanding a number of our very successful social outreach programs. We invested in the Healthy Living Center. Amy Peacock, our director, is here with us today. It was a program and a center to focus on wellness, to focus on prenatal care, to focus on better eating habits and creating a healthier community. We've been tremendously successful. We've had 50,000 visitors in just over 4 years. We've had 200 community partners. So we've had a tremendous amount of connection. And when we really looked at our expansion project in the Franklinton community, we really wanted to build it around the community needs. We certainly want to partner with everyone in the community. Brian, I think when you talked about change and sometimes how difficult that can be, I think the key is engagement. And when we went about developing our plan, we had over 100 people, 40 key stakeholders were interviewed in a community engagement process that produced 13 key themes. Some are themes that Mount Carmel will continue to own and operate, if you will. Some are shared visions, and others are going to be where we're going to have to look for partners in the community. I think another asset that we have on the campus is the Mount Carmel College of Nursing. Many people don't know, but it's the second largest nursing program in the state of Ohio. That's the state, so we have a huge opportunity. If any of you are looking for your children to procure jobs, nursing is where it's at right now. There's a tremendous demand for nursing, and right now the college is landlocked. So as part of our vision, we'll be expanding the Mount Carmel College of Nursing. We had the opportunity to speak to a number of our college students, and they want much more of a campus-like presence. So we'll be looking to build upon that. They want more amenities on campus. So we're very excited. A lot of our social programs will continue to stay on the campus. A lot of the investments that we've already made in the community will be continued further by our new expansion plan. So we're very, very excited. And like I said, it's been a great community partnership, and we've really appreciated the input and the value that everyone's provided. Many people are in the room today.
Thank you. That is really interesting. I think you brought up community engagement and interviewing stakeholders and hearing those things. How do you continue that on instead of it just being a one-time sort of, we're making a change, how do we impact that? How do you continue that dialogue, or what are you guys trying to do with that?
Sure. So we've had two major conversations with the community. At first, when we made the announcement in March of 2015 that we were going to revitalize and transform the campus, we had a community engagement process where we involved those 100 people. And then we had a land planning process. It's one thing to involve ideas. We actually got over 200 ideas, and that's why we had to distill them down to 13 themes, but then we had a land planning process where we engaged EDGE, who did the West Franklinton project, along with Smith JJR out of Detroit, Michigan, who's had a lot of national exposure related to these projects, and they once again engaged the community related to that. So I think our commitment certainly is very strong. We've continued to involve in the community. So the answer is you need to continue those dialogues. As I said, we've got a lot of visitors into the Healthy Living Center. Our college board is very engaged in the community as well. We've got a number of community outreach leaders in the room today that continue are out in the community evaluating community needs and connecting. So it will be an ongoing process. It's not a static process by any means, but it will be an ongoing process, and we look forward to hearing feedback from you as well in the audience.
Jim, I think I've heard, there's some fear that goes through the residents, through community members about, hey, this is changing. It's going to move people out. It's going to push people out. Can you talk about the fears you hear of, maybe how that in community engagement is being done through the city or through other organizations?
Well, there is a lot of fear about that. There's also resentment. That there's discussion about East Franklinton and West Franklinton. 315 splits the eastern third of Franklinton from the western two-thirds. And that's just a fact of life. I mean, other neighborhoods where that has happened have identified as two separate neighborhoods on both sides of the freeway. I mean, I put it out there one time on Columbus Underground and asked, what neighborhoods actually have a freeway that run through them that identify on both sides? The answer is Milo Grogan, as it turns out. I hadn't thought of that, but, and Franklinton. So, there is a certain amount of resentment that, there was a moment there, when the feeling in the neighborhood switched from a sort of isolation, desolation, abandonment to, oh, this thing really is going to move, we're going to be part of something. And then the next moment after that was, why are they only talking about the property that's right up against the railroad track or part of downtown, and why did they rename it East Franklinton? And is it a way to exclude us from anything good that could happen down here? In fact, the name East Franklinton comes from 1968 when the freeway was put in, was the first time it was used, and it's in all the documentation, but nobody ever really reads that stuff. So, and I mean documentation, I mean the land use plans. And the 2003 land use plan spells it out pretty clearly. This part of the neighborhood should develop differently. But there, there is a feeling among the residents, I think, and this is just my opinion, there's been no data accumulated to bear this out, but there's a general feeling, I think partly driven by media reports of, things like somebody wants to rent an apartment, lease an apartment for $1,200 a month, which is really, really high for Franklinton. The dispatch writes a story about it, and all of a sudden, everybody gets up in arms. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it gets a bit of a frenzy in the discussion at the bar. It turns into a giant gentrification. It scares the hell out of everybody. I'm not saying it's not happening, but I don't think it's as bad as people think it is yet. It'll head that direction for sure. And the way, what do you do about it? You plan for it, and I think we have planned for it. You build as much affordable housing as fast as you can. Unfortunately, the resources to build affordable housing are limited and highly competitive, and it does require a pretty strong community organization to be part of it. It helps a lot to have a big institution in the neighborhood like Mount Carmel, especially one that has a lot of land that's going to have to be redeveloped here pretty soon. I think a lot of affordable housing could be part of that. I've been part of the conversations that Sean has described, some of them, and have been advocating and will advocate right now that a lot of that land be dedicated to low-income housing tax credit projects done by neighborhood organizations like Fuel or Integrated Housing and some other local partners, Homeport. And let's get everybody on this together. The houses that we were part of, that I was part of at FDA, got done through partnerships, through big partnerships, some with private developers, some with nonprofit developers. But it's incredibly expensive and challenging route to go to build things and make them affordable in an environment where building things costs a lot of money. But the way to do that is through good partnerships and talking to each other.
If I can just add one thing, I think it's important that we don't deny that there's a reality that around this fear of displacement. When you have a disproportionate number of the population in rental housing, which I think is the case, and land values go up because development happening in any part of it, but in this case on the eastern edge in particular, then there's this fear that as the land value goes up, that those rental homes will in fact go away. So it's not just the challenge of building more, but the potential loss of what's there. And sometimes we act as though that's an irrational fear, and it is a completely legitimate fear. And part of what I believe, and I've said this to people we're partnering with on larger projects in the eastern part of Franklinton, is it's not enough to come into the neighborhood and make money in one part of the neighborhood. You have to also make an impact across the neighborhood. So if you have the opportunity through partnerships, and the city is investing significant money with every developer who's doing anything to be able to create these large-scale projects, then you also, I think, have a responsibility to be part of the partnership solution that Mount Carmel might be looking for, that folks like Homeport or Fuel or others are looking for when it comes to resources or like expertise around some of these other housing issues. So you can't just build in East Franklinton and say, look at what I contributed. You have got to recognize you have a responsibility goes all the way through the neighborhood from my perspective.
Sean, talk about jobs and how you guys think about sort of engaging the most local people to Franklinton. I imagine if rents go up, but also job wages can go up in that area, then maybe people can stay if that becomes an issue for them. Is Mount Carmel think really local about the workforce?
Absolutely. We're one of the region's largest employer. We're the 8th largest employer in the region. So certainly we look at all of Central Ohio and making sure that we have good paying jobs. We certainly look at the neighborhood as well. We have a number of colleagues at Mount Carmel West that actually walk to work or bike to work, so that's certainly something that's very important to us. And I think, if you would allow me to kind of dream a little bit here, Brian, one of the things that I would love to see when we see some more housing in the community is a lot more of our colleagues live in the community. So a student matriculates to the Mount Carmel College of Nursing on campus for 4 years, lives there, and all of a sudden, as we have more housing options in Franklinton, they begin living in the community. It's a great opportunity, especially for some of our younger nurses, to live closer to downtown and have the amenities of urban living, et cetera. So I think, that would truly be a panacea of ours as we develop some of the engagement process across the community related to housing. So we certainly look to make sure that we're a partner. I know one of the things that we've also been working on right now is Franklinton Rising is moving into the neighborhood as well, and we certainly support them. But there's a lot of community-based assets in Franklinton, so we'll continue to support the local economy as well.
This will be a quick question before we get to audience questions from you, but for each of you, history will be ultimately the test of whether or not we get this unquote right. I don't know what right looks like, but I suppose if right looks like more people are working, more people are living, and they're happier and living healthy, that seems like a right answer for us. What are we getting right now? What can we do better on? And we will only quote you in every media source out there, so it's okay.
Well, if I can say, one of the things I think that we are getting right, and I hope continues to be this way, is that the new development that is happening is a balance between organic and orchestrated. And what I mean by that is, if you think about orchestrated development, one of the benefits is it happens really fast. Look at the Arena District. Relatively speaking, that was developed really quickly compared to like the Short North, and yet it has a single character and it has a single patron, and that has been good for the community. But I think the nature of Franklinton demands that it is more organic. And what that means is there needs to be opportunities for individual people to own pieces of property, develop those pieces of property, build businesses there, create more of a fabric inside what is a real community. And I think that's happening. I think that's happening on the east side, and I believe there are opportunities for that all the way through to the western edge and south. And so I do think that balance of that. It's been good that some big players have come in and taken on some pieces of property, but I think even those will be divided up as we go forward. So I'm happy to see that balanced approach versus a fully orchestrated push into Franklinton, which I think would be less diverse.
I think the collaboration is key as well, Brian. There's no shortage of people in the community that truly want to collaborate. So as we look upon our vision, we're talking to a lot of key community stakeholders. So I think in order to get this right in your terms, you really need to involve and engage the community. So that partnership has been so valuable to us throughout the community. So if we can continue to collaborate, if we can continue to partner, I think that there's a huge probability that we're going to get this right.
I think we are fortunate in Franklinton that, in a way, we've come on all at once. That flood wall got done. Before the flood wall was finished, it was not possible to build there. I think that we had the time to reflect on what a neighborhood ought to be and to begin put together strategies to pursue that. I think the plans that were made, there were two, one for the east of the freeway, one for the west of the freeway, are solid plans made by the community, adopted by the community, and have a lot of good ideas in them. I think we're fortunate at this period in history that we can look at the whole past 100 years of neighborhood construction and gentrification and things that have occurred and learn from that. I think, you know, we are aware of where we could fall down, and we're now able to, I mean, just the fact that we're talking about this so much shows that we're aware of this gentrification that could happen. I think has not happened yet, but could happen if we're not careful about that. I think we're lucky in that regard.
Well, none of you guys said what we could improve on, so I guess I'll leave it there. But so on that topic, Jim, of gentrification as it is, I mean, what will we know? Is there a moment where, I mean, it's not like we're taking a test every semester and checking in to see if we've done it well. So this is all fluid and it's going to happen. When do we check in to know if this is going well or not?
You know, I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, soon, I hope. I mean, I think some analysis needs to be done by somebody to look at, you know, are people actually being displaced from the neighborhood? You know, we looked closely at, has anybody actually been displaced so far from construction that's occurred? The answer is no. I don't think so. But it's not possible to know that information at this point. So I can't say what exactly that looks like. It's an ongoing discussion.
Do any of you think there's a unique reason why Columbus might get this right over another city? I mean, we're pretty new. This has been done before, as you mentioned. So is there something unique about Columbus that will help us be more right than anywhere else?
So I'm not from Columbus. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. So when I start putting some, I hope family and friends are not watching, but when I start putting, you know, some comparisons.
I think they get great ratings in Cleveland, so they're definitely going to see this.
I think some of the parallels is the political climate here is much more collaborative. You know, everybody from the county to the city, and Christopher probably can opine on this as well because he's from the same part of the state that I'm, really are truly looking at this as a community benefit. It's not, you know, one political party, it's not one area of town saying we're going to try to up the other one. It's us looking at this as a region and saying, you know, if we can create jobs in Franklinton, if we can create jobs and build homes in other parts of the region, this is going to be a success. And I think that's one of the reasons why Columbus has been a booming success over the last 20 to 25 years, is there has been that attitude of collaboration that what's good for the city, what's good for the region is going to be good for the community. So I definitely think that there, at least from my perspective and background in another part of the state, there's foundations here that will definitely get this right. And the city's already been very, very supportive of our Franklinton plans and working with us to continue to collaborate.
I would definitely echo that. You know, I've gone back and forth and lived in different parts of the state, and I think one of the things that really struck me when I came back to Columbus in 2011, having been in Cleveland for 6 or 7 years again before that, and then having been out on the West Coast, is I have never once heard anyone in Columbus pine for the past. Oh, if we could just be the city we were 100 years ago. Nobody in Columbus thinks that way. And you combine that sort of aspiration for the horizon, for what's possible, with this cultural imperative that is now rooted, I think, among all leadership, civic, public sector, private sector, which is open and smart, and you apply it to the challenge we're talking about, which I don't think of as gentrification. I think about as revitalizing. This is a neighborhood which the city turned its back on 100 years ago because of a flood, and then it sat there like fallow land. And there are people who have been living there for sure, and we should think about their best interest, because displacement is not part of a thoughtful, humane, constructive approach. But there will be hundreds of new people who will be coming to Franklinton with aspirations and expertise and skills and creativity. And at a very human level, not at some big corporate development level, but at a very human level, they will begin to interact, integrate, hopefully engage, as Sean has said, with their neighbors, and some new version of Franklinton will emerge. I am incredibly optimistic. In fact, I think the future of Franklinton is intimately tied to the future of Columbus. If you want Columbus to be the greatest city it can be, then you need Franklinton that Western community we turned our back on to become everything it has the potential to become. So I'm an absolute optimist because of that sort of dynamic that I think is alive in Columbus today.
Okay, well, it's your turn. And by the way, I have a non-factual based theory that this is called a first-generation city. It's some of us who were born here, had parents that came here from outside. So for those of you who live in Columbus, it's like, you know, we're the first generation that's sort of taking over the city, and so hopefully we'll make it into something great as well. But I'm sure somebody's pining for the past weather possibly from today. Okay, so audience, your chance. You can, they have a very specific script here. We'll move to obvious questions for a few minutes. Do not be shy. Step up to the microphone. And I will tell you this, a question ends with a question mark. That means if you begin to give an opinion, we will know that there is not a question involved. So, someone can step up and ask the first question, or I will continue to do so.
It's a good discussion. I'm Tony Guglielmato. As we look at the short north, everybody loves to go down there and have dinner, and those that are fortunate enough to live in that area really enjoy it. Can you think of any things that have happened in the short north that shouldn't be duplicated in Franklinton?
Well, the easy answer is parking. But I think the smart city people in the room or in the city would say that won't be an issue in 20 years when kids don't get driver's licenses and we're picked up and dropped off in different ways. But I think personally, I think the short north is a very interesting parallel for how Franklinton can develop a mix of residential and commercial endeavor. Although I think Franklinton has the ability for more of a downtown feel because it's going to spill. I think it's going to spill right through the peninsula and westward. But that's one thing from the short north.
I don't personally see much comparison to the short north in Franklinton. First of all, the short north is very linear in nature, right? It follows High Street. Broad Street through Franklinton is not like High Street through the short north. It's more like High Street through the Brewery District or the German Village. It's the edge. It's still obviously a very important corridor, but it's not the focus area. And the other difference with short north is they started with a really good building stock. Unfortunately, Franklinton, because of the floods and because this is Columbus, has lost a lot of buildings over the years. And so, and you know, we can use that to an advantage also. There's real value in new buildings, especially if they're done in a creative fashion and to the proper scale. And to speak to the parking issue real quickly, we want a parking problem in Franklinton. We don't want parking lots. If you don't want to like walk from any distance or ride your bike or take an Uber or park a little further away, then don't come. We want a future neighborhood where people don't base their decisions on whether they're not going to get a parking space.
Jim, I don't know, man. It's not like a promote. Don't come if you don't want to.
Well, this is the Bridge to Nowhere neighborhood, remember?
That's true.
And we just kind of gave that the middle finger and said, if you don't want to come to nowhere, don't. We don't need you.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Roger Blackwell. The question I have is about displacement. And maybe this is an opportunity to prevent the displacement that often occurs with gentrification. And I'm familiar with the refuge on Sullivan Avenue and what they have done to get people back into the workforce by treating addiction issues very effectively. And the School of Nursing seems to be that, and an ideal factory too. Are there other programs to help the poor people become prosperous enough to not be displaced? Any organizations or programs that are happening? Or maybe have some other good examples of that?
Yeah. So one of the huge challenges that our community is facing is behavioral health, substance abuse. We're actually partnering on a joint venture that will actually quadruple the size of the behavioral health services or the inpatient beds that Mount Carmel has. It's about 8 miles from our current location. Other things that we have been doing right now in our emergency department, we have peer collaborators in the emergency department to help those individuals that are afflicted by substance abuse substance abuse and getting them back, number one, so they can beat their addiction, but number two, start looking for job prospects for them in the community. We've been also very focused on the Project Dawn initiative, which focused on the naloxone to make sure that people are not dying from these overdoses. So I think it's a community epidemic right now. It's a national epidemic. I think that there's been a lot of things we've done with the Franklin Public Health Department. We're not there yet. But I think to your point, number one, getting these patients out of their addiction, and number two, getting them back on their feet where they can work is something that is key to our future. And we're certainly looking for any organizations that want to partner with us on this. I think this is a community-wide opportunity to solve this challenge.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there that I think show light on the many organizations that are helping out there. And what's cool is that there's new ones emerging. There's ones with one or two people, grassroots, and ones that have been established for a long time. So Jim can probably point you afterwards in other directions to find those resources.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention there are a number of really great nonprofits doing really amazing work in Franklinton, like the real hard, in the trenches, frontline stuff. My organization, we just built houses. We've tried to participate in a lot of different things, but the real hard work to me is done by like Gladden Community House and Lower Lights Ministries and Integrated Services. Where Franklinton is it's a neighborhood that is home to some of the poorest people in the Midwest, really, or in the country. Median household income is less than $15,000. There is need for services of all kinds, and we're fortunate that we have a number of agencies. Lower Lights Ministries is setting up a grocery store with the help of City of Columbus and a lot of others. I think I'm not going to try to remember all the partners, but it's an incredible undertaking, and these little efforts by these high capacity organizations can have such an impact, especially if fueled by outside sources. In other words, if they had more money, they could always do a lot more. There's a few out there that are just killing it and could kill it even more and help a lot of people if only they had just a 20% more, not disposable, but discretionary income.
Simple.
Good afternoon. Doug Arsenault with Kocha. First of all, this has been a fantastic panel, one of the best I've been to here at CMC. Piggybacking off the last two questions, transportation is the great equalizer. We have several lines running through Franklinton, and then with our long-range plan includes looking at a high-capacity line that could, connect Franklinton with downtown and all the way over to the Discovery District. So my question is, what opportunities do you see from a transit-oriented development, trying some new things in Franklinton that will really make it unique in connecting the people that are there, the people that are coming, and the future until we have flying cars like Back to the Future?
Well, I think there are different kinds of mobility. There's the mobility within the neighborhood, and right now, to some degree, Franklinton, for those who don't live there, is a drive-through neighborhood. So if you're there when the traffic is coming in or out, good luck crossing a street. There are challenges. So there's some engineering and the infrastructure and how even current traffic needs to flow through there to allow the community to develop in the ways that Jim and others want it to, and to create a real plan for moving pedestrian traffic around in these areas in a way that makes sense and connects islands of activity and development. So that's one kind of mobility. I think there are all kinds of emerging. Kocha's, I know, a part of what's happening with a host of smart city initiatives. I think Franklinton's a natural testing ground for that. I know there was some talk among the smart city team around what's happening with some of the larger assets like the abandoned Ford dealership. Ford just launched the Chariot service. They did that launch out of Franklinton at the Idea Foundry, which is a different kind of mobility solution. It's citywide, but I think you're going to see Franklinton being an experimental zone for some of these things. I know some of the developers would rather not be building parking garages. There's a lot of conversation about how you build those differently now so that they can be have alternative future uses, and at the Idea Foundry we have a number of players who are talking about electrification and how do you build that into the community in terms of the cars and how they're going to be different. So I think there's public transportation issues. Kocha is clearly doing some things, and then are these new players. There's the sort of personal transportation, and then there's individual mobility through the neighborhood. Each of these offers opportunity, in my view, for a lot of new innovation, because there aren't really established routes except in and out during the commuter times for the most part right now.
Well, yeah, Franklinton is a little difficult to get to because we have, for one thing, from the northern approach, you have to go over a river, a freeway, and a railroad track to get there. And the southern approach is kind of similar. They were really, for years, there was only one way in out of the neighborhood from the east, and that was Broad Street because the other two bridges were down. So all these things have come together to sort of activate all at once. As far as inward mobility, this is what's spectacular about Franklinton is it's a wonderfully designed place. I mean, the blocks are certainly walkable. The sidewalks are in place. It's the old, traditional American neighborhood grid structure, right? Front porches, sidewalks, walkable blocks, a proper mix of uses all along the way. What we lack, and I'm getting off topic here with your question, we lack is a clear commercial district, if you will. A clear commercial corridor. Broad Street does not serve as that anywhere, really, except maybe right at the top of the hilltop. And certainly not in Franklinton. It's a regional destination, and it's a freeway. It's too fast. And this is something I'm hoping that, when the hospital redevelops, we can begin looking at it like that. This is just me being, doing the urban design thing. But as far as transportation within the community, it's a beautiful place for that, except for crossing Broad Street.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Michael Cole, Columbus City School Board of Education. Thank you for this forum. Good afternoon, CMC. How does education play a role in this emerging mosaic? We have some incredible schools in the area. Starling K through 8 is a viable option for families that are coming in looking for kindergarten through 8th grade options. West High School is now becoming an emerging opportunity for students who are interested in trades and networking themselves in that. We also have a very close downtown high school, but I'd love to know and hear how it is you see that Columbus City schools in our public education system play a role in the development of Franklinton and this mosaic.
Go ahead. That was a great question. I'm sorry I interrupted the applause, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. Education is key. One of the opportunities that we have with expanding the Mount Carmel College of Nursing is it can become a Mount Carmel College of Health Sciences. Nursing is a huge component, but there's other opportunities related to imaging, radiology technicians, laboratory technicians, central sterile processing, and these are all very well-paying jobs right now. And I think that's one of the things that we really look forward to partnering with organizations like the Columbus City Schools. We've been a little bit linear in our approach because we do have the College of Nursing, and as I mentioned, based on the current land configuration that we have in Franklinton, we haven't been able to expand that, but now we're undergoing a strategic plan through the college to look at not only nursing, but what are the health sciences. As much as we're trying to prevent illness right now, people are still getting sick and utilizing hospital services, et cetera. So I would love to continue to partner with the Columbus City Schools. I think so often we forget that there's a lot of other high-paying jobs for these students to come out, and if they don't necessarily want to go to college, but they want to go the vocational route, we have plenty of opportunities for those positions within our health system. So we'd love to talk and engage with the Columbus City Schools because I think it's a huge asset to the community. And at the end of the day, education will be the foundation for one of the pillars for our success in this community as well.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I think the educational opportunities in Franklinton, both in the public school system, which you just outlined some of the opportunities in terms of who's there, but even in, like with what Andy Boy and the United Schools Network is doing and others, there's a natural benefit to having that educational presence, because to the extent that you want to do any kind of behavioral change, working early in the generational life of the community is a much better way. One of the ways of impacting parents at home is through children who are coming home, whether that's around wellness or around financial literacy or a whole host of things. So I think beyond the educating of students themselves, them as a channel into the broader community and as an amenity asset in in a neighborhood. Positive schools are really important. Even at the Foundry, and we didn't speak much about what happens at the Foundry, there's an educational component. We run 50 classes a month at the Idea Foundry, 250 or so people. They range from young people coming in to learn how to weld or make something to, tinkerers, to people running businesses on top of those workshop spaces we have in the Foundry. All of that is designed because when you are learning, you're learning something about yourself. Your self-esteem is being built, and I think that's part of the kind of fabric of what's possible in Franklinton as the community is being reinvented. So,
I'd like to, excuse me. I'd like to add to that. Franklinton at its peak had 30,000 residents. We're down to less than 10,000 residents, which is why you see a lot of vacant land and houses. It's part of the reason. We would like to see that population get back to where it was, and we would like families to be part of it. And so, so the school question is a major one, and we're super happy to have a couple of really good charter schools in the neighborhood now, especially the United Schools Network, which is just killing it. I mean, they're really a great school, and they have 2 locations in Franklinton now, and they're rehabbing the old buildings too, the old classic institutional school buildings. They're rehabbing the one on Dana Avenue, and it's a wonderful project.
Just one other thought. I recently saw a speech given by Ginny Rometty, the CEO at IBM, and she talked about, we used to think about blue collar and white collar, and she talked about new collar jobs. And the idea of a new collar job is you don't get to it through the typical path. To your point, we may be sending kids through programs that are 6 weeks long in order for them to be ready for a job that's waiting for them straight out of high school, or adding a year to high school and having a 5-year path to something in the community. We just need to change our mindset about what it takes to prepare people. And I think Franklinton could be one of those places where we say we're raising sort of new collar jobs as well and paths to those jobs.
Thank you. Yeah, that's probably the most important thing that could happen in Franklinton. Sir.
Good day. My name is Peter Kocha. I grew up in the Bottoms before we moved to the Hilltop. And I occasionally drive through the old neighborhoods, both on the Bottoms and the Hilltop. I have a question as it relates to 2 locations, which are probably eyesores, would be considered eyesores right now, and they also relate to the issues of jobs and the east-west divide. The first one is the old Cooper Stadium site, and just recently read an article in the Dispatch about how things have really fallen behind schedule there. And I know that when that was first brought up several years ago, it was mentioned as a potential for a number of jobs for people who lived in the Bottoms or in Franklinton. And I was just wondering if, excuse me, if you had any insights as to how that might fit into the overall development plans for Franklinton. And then the second part is the east-west divide, and of course that's the 315 freeway. And which I remember very well because I was at Holy Family Grade School when that freeway was built. And so the question is, and Mount Carmel is very close to that divide, if you will. And I was wondering if Mount Carmel, excuse me, Mount Carmel was envisioning any kind of development there that might try to serve as a unifying factor between the east and west. And obviously the eyesore that comes to mind is the old Graham Ford dealership there. So just would appreciate your thoughts on both of those points.
So maybe I can start with the second question, and Jim, if you want to take the Cooper Stadium. So the Graham Ford site is for sale. We obviously don't own that property. We know that it's a crucial piece right next to our organization, and we certainly want to talk with the city, or we've been in talks with the city. We do not plan on purchasing that as part of our development. Currently, we think we have enough land for the things that we want to do. So I think that is going to be a key to the development. One of the things I know was brought up earlier about parking. We have 2,200 parking spots on our campus. Not all of those will be in use. So we definitely think that the parking garages can be a huge catalyst to some opportunities within the area, but we don't have any plans per se. You know, one of the things that we're doing is with our campus plan, we're moving our emergency department to the Green Street Center, which will allow potentially a full thoroughfare through State Street, which could be another community connector as well. So no necessarily plans for Graham Ford, but we do have some connection opportunities to help connect both parts of the community on State Street. Jim?
I was part of the Franklinton Area Commission on top of running the FDA for all those 14 years, and so I was in the middle of that conversation about that, reusing the old stadium for a racetrack. And it's funny, one of the arguments for doing the racetrack deal was to do something. It was sitting there vacant. There were weeds growing in the infield. There were probably prostitutes using the parking lot. And so we had that fight. It tore us apart as a neighborhood. There were a lot of bad blood, a lot of good relationships were hurt. Because some people felt the noise was too much for the community. Other people just wanted the jobs at any cost and needed to get something built on that site. And, what happens? What is it, 5 years now? What happened to that urgency to do something down there? What was that? That was the main reason that we have to take this. We have nothing else, was their argument. Was a lot of people's argument. And, what do I think is going to happen? Yeah, there will be jobs there. It'll be like a Walmart or a Sam's Club. But remember, we're realigning our freeways downtown. That site sits at the confluence of I-70 and I-71. When that section gets finished and the new ramps are put in and everybody knows when the dust settles, that's going to be an amazingly spectacular site. So yeah, there'll be jobs there. Wait for the freeway to get done and expect them to be retail.
Great. We have time for one more question, guys. So
Something more optimistic.
Right.
go ahead.
Hi, my name is Esther DeBusk. I work at Ohio State, and I'm a Franklinton resident. I live in West Franklinton, right? Any Franklinton residents out there? Yeah. So I'm really interested, and this is going to be a real question, but I'm going to share real quick. In getting to know my neighbors over the past few years that I've been living in Franklinton, many of my neighbors do want to see change. They want better schools. They want access to food through grocery stores. They want less crime. They want safe streets for their kids and things like that. And they're worried that they will be displaced if those things come along, and thus the housing increases there. So there was some discussion about a humane approach to change in the neighborhood. And I'm interested in some specifics of what you believe a humane approach might be for 10,000-ish residents who have a median family income of about $15,000 a year. What does a humane approach actually look like? I often hear the discussion of we need this. What is this? And how do individuals actually get involved in making this happen for real residents within our community?
Well, I'll speak to it from sort of my point of view, but I do think a big piece of this is how do we improve quality of life, and there are people better suited to that. But from an economic opportunity standpoint, people forget that Lucas Sullivan set aside lots on Gift Street that he gave to people in exchange just for building a home. And I think that we need to think about what we're willing to give to residents as a path to prosperity in that neighborhood. People who are willing to make an investment of time or around their own education, how do we give them some place to stand and create something of value? Everything doesn't have to be Amazon or Google to be valuable. There are opportunities at a street level, some of which people have done from a more social impact standpoint. But I think a neighborhood has needs and there are economic opportunities, and we've tried to be talking with people like the folks at Huntington Bank and others about how to invest money in a targeted and strategic way. I, for one, will be working very hard to hold spaces for locally based entrepreneurs and others who want to create things themselves and around that organic and human approach to economic development. At least that's one strategy.
And just to add on to that, the foundation for our strategic plan for the revitalization was healthcare, education, social services, and economic development. So I think a lot of the things that we're proposing certainly satisfy that. I think the other huge opportunity that we have is purposeful green space, which we'll be bringing to the community. So I think if we can do all of that, it's definitely going to be a catalyst for continued growth in the community and satisfaction by the residents.
To me, humane redevelopment means, I think, to give people that have been there for a while, and new people. I don't want to, I hate the fact we always talk about all the old people have been there forever. I mean, new people are valid people also. I know many friends that have moved to the neighborhood in the last 10 years that are doing great stuff, and they're kind to their neighbors, and they participate, and they start things, and they help. But to give people an opportunity to own the place. I don't mean literally, I do mean literally, but I also mean figuratively. You know, part of gentrification is cultural gentrification. You know, people feel like they no longer have control of their place, which I think is a whole like East-West Franklinton divide thing. The whole, I mean, we even have two names, the Franklinton and the Bottoms. You know, which word are you going to say? You know, it depends on how, you know, much you own the neighborhood. We need to figure out a way to convey to everybody that we want everybody to own part of this, and find ways that they can own houses too and property. There's a million different ideas on that. I always come at it from a home ownership perspective. That's what I'm trained to do. But I think like a lot of stuff that Christopher's talking about is very interesting. We could pursue a lot of different angles. Like I said, I'm optimistic that there's a lot of really smart people, a lot of really resourceful people thinking about this. We may butt heads over details on a lot of things, but I honestly think that everybody wants the same thing. I don't think anybody's trying to take advantage of anybody now. I think we want to make a good community for the people that have been there and the people who want to go there.
I hope you all enjoyed today's forum. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Please thank our sponsors, the Robert Weiler Company and Casto. And of course, thanks to our speakers, Jim Sweeney, Sean McKibben, Christopher Celeste, and Brian Zuercher. Thank you. And thank all of you for being here. Remember, there's a special forum on civility this Friday at noon right here. You can sign up outside, and hope to see you at CMC also next Wednesday. Thanks for being here.